Rajasthan, India, a ruined fortress stands at the center of one of India's darkest and most enduring reputations. Bhangarh Fort is a real place, but the stories surrounding it speak of curses, forbidden desires, and a settlement brought to destruction by forces its people could not resist. Over time, history and folklore have fused so completely there that the silence of the ruins feels inseparable from the warnings attached to them. These are the legends of Bhangarh Fort. Bhangarh was a planned stronghold established in the late 16th century, complete with residential quarters, temples, commercial streets, and a royal complex. What survives now is not a symbolic ruin, but a physical shell of a once inhabited settlement, which is precisely what gives the later legends their force. They attach themselves to a place clearly built to last, to assert authority and for everyday life. However, they stand today as an empty shell. According to one of the fort's oldest legends, a holy man was already living in the area before Bhangarh was constructed. He allowed the settlement to be established only on one condition: no building in the new town was ever to rise high enough for its shadow to fall across his retreat. The warning was not framed as advice or symbolism, but as a limit that could not be crossed without consequence. Fort was permitted to exist only so long as it respected a boundary set by someone believed to possess spiritual authority. For a time, that condition was said to hold. Then, as the settlement expanded and ambition overtook restraint, one of the structures was built too high. Its shadow reached the holy man's dwelling, breaking the agreement and triggering the curse attached to it. From that moment, the legend says, ruin became inevitable. The story does not describe a sudden explosion of violence or a single dramatic event. Instead, it presents destruction as something set in motion the instant the line was crossed, as though the fate of the place had already been decided the moment the shadow fell. What gives this legend its staying power is the nature of the offense. No blood is spilled, no battle is fought, and no enemy appears at the gate. The disaster begins with arrogance, with the assumption that a warning could be ignored without the consequences. In that sense, the curse is less about magic than hierarchy. A fortified town rises against the spiritual limit and is emptied for it. The image at the center of the legend is simple and unnerving: a shadow moving across stone, and a place beginning to die because it reached too far. Second and more widely repeated legend centers on Ratnavati, the princess of Bhangarh, whose beauty is said to have drawn the attention of a powerful tantric practitioner named Singhya. In the story, Singhya became obsessed with her and sought to control her through sorcery rather than courtship. He is said to have enchanted a bottle of perfume or oil intended for the princess. believing that once she touched it, she would fall under his power and come to him against her will. The legend turns on this act of hidden manipulation, desire expressed not openly but through coercion masked as ritual skill. Ratnavati, however, is not portrayed as passive. In most versions, she recognized the enchantment before it could take effect and hurled the object away. It struck a large stone, and the spell reversed course, causing the boulder itself to roll towards Singya and crush him. Mortally wounded, he is said to have used his final moments to place a curse on Bhangarh, declaring that the town would be destroyed and that no one within it would know peace. The force of the legend comes from this inversion. An attempted act of domination fails, but the failure itself becomes the mechanism through which the entire settlement is condemned. This story lingers for different reasons than the warning of the holy man. Here the threat is intimate, driven by obsession, humiliation, and revenge rather than a violation of sacred boundary. The destruction of Bhangarh is tied not to expansion or pride, but to a single act of thwarted possession. That makes the curse feel less remote and more poisonous, as though the ruining of the fort, with one man's refusal to accept rejection, then spread outward until it attached itself to the entire place. In this version, Bhangarh is not merely abandoned, it is left carrying the residue of final act of hatred pronounced by someone who is already dying. What can be stated with confidence is far narrower than the folklore built around the site. Bhangarh Fort is a genuine historical ruin in Rajasthan, and its haunted reputation rests on legends rather than documented evidence or curses of supernatural events. No surviving record confirms the downfall described in either tale, and the site's present-day notoriety comes from the way these stories have attached themselves to an already deserted landscape. The result is a place where the physical remains are real. The explanations are not verifiable, and yet the atmosphere between the two has proved strong enough to outlast both certainty and proof. Bhangarh endures because its stories are built around irreversible consequences. A warning ignored, a boundary crossed, a curse spoken in the final seconds before death. The fort's reputation survives not through proof, but through the precision of those images and the way they attach themselves to silence, emptiness, and decay. Places like this become dark in the imagination because they seem to preserve the shape of a disaster while withholding the event itself, leaving only structure, absence, and a sense that something was stripped away long before anyone arrived to ask why. It concludes this entry, but every shadow leads to another trace, and every trace to another unanswered question. If you want the next case as soon as it resurfaces, stay with us. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and step back into the dark with Noctombre.